Hello, everyone. This is the Backdrop biweekly outreach meeting. Today is Thursday, May 12th in most of the world, 13th in some parts. As is our practice, we will go around the room. Everyone will have a brief introduction and pick the next person to introduce. I'm Robert Lang, bug folder on the internet, coming to you from Altadena, California. I'll pass the baton over to Martin.
I'm Martin, Yorkshire Pudding on the internet in the United Kingdom. I'll pass it on to Joseph.
I'm Joseph. I'm a developer from Las Vegas, Nevada, and Sarvasri.
Yeah, I'm in Walnut Cove, North Carolina, and I'm interested in getting new people into Backdrop and getting beginners started. And I'm pretty much a beginner myself, so that's what I'm after. I guess Tim is the only one left.
Sorry, got something in my throat. I'm Tim Erickson. I'm St. Paul Tim. I'm in Deerwood, Minnesota, and been really sort of busy and distracted lately. And yeah, we have our next 1.22 release coming out on Sunday, so that has been taking up some of my Backdrop time. So yeah, I guess we did we get Joseph? Yeah, we did. I heard Joseph.
Yeah.
Okay. This is, again, our weekly outreach meeting. Jen and Nate are out of town this week, so they won't be at either meeting. Irina tried to get to this meeting, and I'll just really quickly pass along. I think she just wanted to kind of congratulate us on a couple of good months outreach-wise in terms of some really good blog posts out there in the last 2 months. We've gotten the Atten company has done some nice blog posts about their upgrade of Backdrop of Drupal 7 site to Backdrop for Stanford. Irina has written 2 blog posts that include Backdrop on the Pantheon website. She mentioned talk at DrupalCon about Backdrop, but I was not there and she didn't have time to elaborate on that. So I'd be curious to hear what, I haven't really heard much about what, if any, talk there was at DrupalCon about Backdrop. I mean, I'm sure it came up, but I'd love to hear more. If anybody knows any rumors, let us know. Some others were there. Anything else that Irina mentioned? Martin, do you remember?
No, I don't remember anything else.
I think those were the big things.
Yeah.
There have been some interesting discussions in Twitter. There's one guy in particular who has on a couple of occasions said he really wished that Backdrop and Drupal would collaborate to create some kind of Drupal classic. And I have, some of you probably noticed the topic I opened up in Zulip. Basically, I actually wrote a blog post, didn't I? No, a forum post. I don't know that it's gotten much of a response. I wrote a forum topic where I talked about what that collaboration might look like, specifying that I don't think the Backdrop is interested in being absorbed back into Drupal, but if it serves the need of the community, I think that there are opportunities for Backdrop and Drupal to work together to make the upgrade process easier and or to provide confidence to Drupal 7 site owners that Backdrop is a viable option. That to me, that seems at least worth exploring, whether or not the Drupal community will be receptive to that. And when I say the Drupal community, I mean the leadership. I know that some members of the community are open to that idea, but whether or not the leadership would be is the question. So, but anyways, there's been a little bit of public discussion on Twitter about all of that, which I think is interesting and good for our outreach.
We got a few mentions on LinkedIn with regards to the open, what was it, the on the tip of my tongue, that, you know, where we had all those volunteers.
Open Force.
Open Force, that's the one. I was thinking open source, and no, that's not it. Open Force, yes. We've had some mentions on there, and you know, some of the people saying how they really enjoyed working with us, and so that's been quite good. But
Sure. Anything, while we're sharing uplifting stories about our recent efforts, anyone have anything to add? Anything about outreach successes? Well, I'm going to jump in here. Sarvashri shared the link to Drupal Camp Asheville. And since our last outreach meeting, it has been confirmed that we are doing a training. Justin submitted a training proposal to Drupal Camp Asheville, and they have accepted that. They have also encouraged us to submit backdrop session topics for Drupal Camp Asheville. We have one of the key organizers for Drupal Camp. Well, I should say more than one of them. More than one of them are have been very supportive of Drupal. If you look at the list of organizers for Drupal Camp Asheville, several of them have been to Backdrop Live events and been very supportive of us in the past. One in particular has actually, written modules or ported modules from Drupal to Backdrop. So I think there's a lot of support for us at Drupal Camp Asheville, and it is an opportunity for us to promote, sort of the first chance for people to go to an event in 2 years with Backdrop sort of present. And there'll at least be a training, if not more than that. I don't know, other than Justin's the only one that's committed. I know Sarvashri is not too far away, and who knows, maybe if some other of us go, that will lure him to come to Drupal Camp Asheville. We'll see, but I have it on my list of things that I would really like to do this summer, but I'm just not sure I can swing it yet. We also have Drupal Camp Colorado on our calendar list. I think that Jen might have agreed to do a training or something at Drupal Camp Colorado, but this is unofficial. I think if anybody was at the meeting last week, didn't she mention something about that? Anybody remember? No. Okay. We do have a number of supporters in Colorado, so that's a good place for us to go. Anything else in terms of past stuff? Otherwise, let's move on to the next release. Okay. Martin, I know you said you might have to cut out in a little while, but you wanted to talk about promoting the next release. So Backdrop 1.22 comes out on Sunday.
Yeah, so I think I don't know if there's any thoughts about anything else that's really. I'm just thinking what I like to do for LinkedIn is to kind of to be able to kind of hook it on to what people might use it for and things like that. So I think the cards one is a good one to hook on, which is why I was asking. I'm not sure that there's a lot of the others are quite kind of small and not really kind of headline grabbing type things. I mean, it all sort of adds up to constant improvement, which is a good story in itself. But unless anyone thinks that there's anything else, that's what I'm kind of going to go with. It would be really good if we had a recipe that we could say, and if you've already got a Backdrop site, here's what you can do. But I don't know, I feel it might be a bit too much to have for you to have time for that.
just to elaborate and make sure everybody understands, Martin's been asking about whether or not we could have a recipe for that feature, the cards feature. I assume the recipe would involve a front page view so that somebody on an existing backdrop site could just sort of install the recipe and have, because this new cards feature, which we're going to have in the next backdrop, is only for new installations. It will not affect existing sites. My gut reaction to this idea is that existing sites have already, aren't necessarily likely to want like a new feature like this because it's so specific, right? But that could be wrong. And the more I think about it, I think there could be some PR value in it, even if it isn't that useful practically, even if most sites, wouldn't really want to add this as a recipe. It does give us a chance to highlight the availability of recipes, which I think people, and at least abstractly to provide a use case, like it might make the whole concept of recipes feel a little bit more real. In that we can sort of point to an example, like here's something on that's a part of new Drupal core sites that you could just download in a module and add as a recipe. Does that make sense to people?
I think that's quite a good. I think that's quite a good angle.
Yeah, finding ways to promote new features that are interesting to people is a good idea.
So people, how big a deal is this? I mean, I would love, like, if, let's say to me, the fact that Drupal, the backdrop is going to look different out of the box in a noticeable way is a big deal. But I mean, like if we had an entirely new front end theme, that would be a much bigger deal. But this is still, I think, kind of a big deal, but I don't know if it's a big deal, like promotable. I mean, I think it's a big deal in the sense that like people looking at Backdrop are going to just have a more pleasant experience when they arrive at it. But is it a big deal that we can promote? Like, I mean, for sure, we're going to mention it. I just don't know. I'm looking for feedback on how big of a deal people think and like whether, what the PR value is of this.
I think it is because it's, I think one of the best things for cards, I guess, is it's a way to kind of showcase particular products, services or achievements or things like that. So it's got a kind of broad range of use cases that I think it even if people think, well, I wouldn't do it quite like that, but I can see a way to do it. It fires the imagination beyond just the kind of, it's a content management system. It's this is a content management system, and these are some of the things you can do with it. It's a bit more. So I do think it's worthwhile.
Is it only for the first page?
Well, so that question is interesting, Sarvashri, in that to me, there's actually two completely different aspects to this new feature that in some ways are unrelated. And some people are really excited about, for example, the changes to the front page. And I think those changes, in ways are independent of the new card content type. We could have created them using posts and views and right. It's like, but what some people are, including myself, are excited about is the fact that Backdrop looks different when you install it and that it has some helpful information on the front page that sort of leads you into building your site, which we didn't have before. And that, to me, the benefits of that are independent of the cards themselves. We used the cards themselves as a new content type, which is not just about the front page at all. The new card content type is a feature that's just sort of built into Backdrop, which can help you independent or on the front page, either way. But I think people are more excited about the impact that those cards are having on the front page than they are about the cards themselves. I could be wrong about that. But
And recipes is a new thing? Or
well,
been expanded, or because it's
So-
using recipes, is that right or not?
no, it's not using recipes at all.
Oh.
But we're using recipes to make it backward. Basically, what recipes are just modules that let you add features. Like the two recipes we currently have are frequently asked questions or testimonials, right? And they're basically just modules that add content types and views to your website. And these are something that really have been possible in Backdrop for a long time, but they became much easier about 6 months ago or 9 months ago. But nobody's really using them yet. And the point was there's this new content type that's in news sites for Backdrop. And some people might be saying, well, I'd like that new content up on my old Backdrop site. Well, they could just build it themselves. But this is a chance for us to say, oh, we have a recipe for that. And it's a chance for us to introduce people or remind them about this feature that already exists in Backdrop, but that they might not understand. And that this might help them understand it because it's a very practical example. So that's how recipes go.
Yeah, could recipes be used to create websites with a focus? I guess, what do you call those when you have a ready-to-go website? Drupal had a name for it.
Distribution.
Distribution. So could recipes create distributions?
I'm talking too much. Does somebody else want to answer?
I think the correct answer is sort of. So enabling a module allows you to do all the same things that you could do in an installation profile. So you could have a module or a recipe that is basically exactly the same features as your distribution and just enable the module in order to get that set up.
Right.
Nobody's
gonna head off now, so
So that would be easier than creating distributions. People could create their own distributions if there was a module with a recipe. Is that right?
Yeah.
Well,
So, what I'm thinking of for beginners, they want, say they're in their massage therapist, let's say, or they are an accountant, or they have some profession. There's lots of professions, and they would like to have some sort of instant website to start from rather than a blank slate. Would that be a good idea to get more people using Backdrop to have some recipes that they could say, well, if you're in this field, then here's a quick recipe module that could get you started. It may not be a final. It would give them a beginning rather than just a blank slate. I think that would be highly promotable.
So a big problem that people ran into in the past with distributions is that they sort of lock you in and you're essentially dependent on the distribution maintainer for when you get updates to Drupal or your modules.
Right.
So a lot of distributions actually ended up being really bad for beginners because of this lock-in effect.
Right.
What recipes allow us to do is essentially take the features of a distribution and break them out into smaller components that can be updated and maintained independently of each other.
That sounds like a huge feature. It sounds like a wonderful thing for new people. Am I off on this, or am I right?
No, I think so. I think that like one-click setup websites for specific purposes are good for people who like don't really know or care about the technical backend stuff, but it requires someone to maintain it and to care about keeping the features for that system up to date. So
Well, could
like,
they get started this way and learn as you go? That's the
Well,
idea.
that's-
They have
that's
something to
kind-
start with, and then they can learn more about how to maintain, get into Drupal and see how things were done, because the recipe can show them how each part of it was done. Am I thinking correctly? You have to pretend you're a new user for this to work.
Um,
I
Go ahead. Joseph, do you have anything to add to that?
my experience with distributions has caused me to warn anyone against using them.
Yeah, but this would not be a distribution, would it?
Well,
No, so yes, it's not a distribution. We do have an advantage over a distribution in that the pieces can be updated separately,
Yeah,
which was one of the large drawbacks, is that if your distribution wasn't updated, then you couldn't update, and there was just nothing you
Right.
could do about it.
right.
that's,
This solves a problem connected with distributions that, if we don't want to do distributions, but we want to give people a beginning, a starting point, would this be a good idea?
We could do that. It would require someone to build it.
there, I mean,
Recipes
wanna-
will,
go ahead, Robert.
recipes will become valuable when we have a bunch of recipes, but we don't yet. And so there's still a layer of developer action needed to create recipes, like creating modules.
Could there be a generic recipe that implements the kinds of things people would want in their quote unquote
Right.
distribution? And then they can modify that or not?
So Raj, this is
You have a lot of hesitancy to
yes,
on this
We-
idea.
because when you say things like that, a lot of people would want. The problem is that I don't know that we don't
New
know
people.
what a lot of people would want, right? And people want very different things, and that's one of the reasons why if there were something that like a majority of people wanted, that we might just put it into core. The problem is
Yeah.
people use Backdrop for so many different purposes that, I mean, even you take a massage therapist, right? And you say, well, that's a use case. Well, it's still kind of a narrow use case compared to the overall usage of Backdrop. So figuring out what it is people want is a challenge in itself. And even then, people really, what they want is the ability to customize those things. And the problem is in using a recipe, I mean, if you build it yourself, you better understand how it was. That's one of the problems I had with distributions, is that if I start with a distribution, I push a button and it implements a whole bunch of features. And I didn't know, as a beginner, I didn't know how those features got there. So it was hard for me to change them. Whereas if I went back and sort of tried to rebuild those features, then I would sort of learn about them as I built them, and it was easier for me to modify them. So I don't know that recipes or distributions are great learning tools. If anything, maybe the opposite, but they are helpful if they meet your exact use case, right? If the recipe is perfect, it gives you exactly what you want, then they're really helpful, because now you just install it and you don't worry about it.
So I'm looking at, people look at Squarespace and Wix and those kinds of things because it gives them sort of a front page that looks glorious, and they think, oh, I'm going to have a great website, until they get into it and they find out, well, I really need this and I need that. And then there's a bunch of expenses added on, even if you can get it within those kinds of programs, and often you can't. So the advantage of Backdrop would be that we could mimic some of the things that those people see when they go look at Wix or Squarespace or some of those things, but then they wouldn't lose the power that they would otherwise lose. And that, I think, is a huge, huge advantage to using something like Backdrop, but there'd
Yeah.
have to be a starting point that looked sort of glorious front page thing, for different.
I'd
different
like to
use
pull
cases.
us, yeah, I'd like to pull us back from this discussion because I feel like we've had it a whole bunch of times.
But this was a different angle. It's the idea of
Well,
using recipes. But anyway,
yeah,
we can move on if you want.
I think I'll just summarize what I think we already know, which is that recipes have, and distributions have the potential to serve some people. And I think I agree with you that they could be a powerful or help bring new users into Backdrop. The problem, of course, is that they take a lot of work to develop. They're not trivial to make. And that has been the holdup. And the problem is that they're not useful to developers. Developers don't need recipes. And so developers are more likely to spend their time developing things that help other developers or help them in their daily work rather than recipes. At least that's my view of why there isn't more effort that goes into recipes. The main reason I've committed time to recipes is because I have a use case that's very specific, which is my Simplo site. It's like I'm trying to provide websites for beginners in a way that where recipes could be really helpful. And that's why I've spent time on that. And I think Joseph has a similar use case, which is why he's been somewhat interested in that. But most developers don't have that use case, and like they would be developing something that's not at all useful to them, and they maybe don't even fully appreciate the benefits of because they don't use them. So, but anyways, I think we need to talk about that at a different time.
All right. I'll have another angle next time.
Where we left off was talking about this upcoming release and how to promote it, and if there's anything else that we can do. I mean, either new venues, but I'm interested in this idea of the angle. Robert, can you say something from your perspective about what you think the impact would be of the new card content type? Is this a big deal or not so much for you? And if it is, what is? It doesn't have to be a big deal, but how would you sell it if you think it can be sold at all?
I think it just takes us a step closer to providing a useful, good-looking website after that first click. I mean, that's the main thing. So I kind of don't think the recipe would be a big deal.
Right.
The adding cards and the new front page, I think, is a pretty good thing, because now someone, they click and their site looks good. And as you said, it also provides an entree into how to customize it. And I think that shouldn't be overlooked. That, especially now that we've added links. I think we've added links back to the documentation. So it's easier for people to get from that first click and the site is installed to, now I want it different from what that click provided, but it's that we've lowered that barrier a little bit. And so I do think that's a good thing.
I think so. I think if I were writing the press release from this, I would focus less on the actual cards themselves, although I would mention that it's not trivial, but I would focus on the sort of the impact the cards have had in terms of helping us provide, useful information and examples to help people get started. So I feel like landing, if I open up a new Backdrop site right now today, as a beginner, it just feels much more inviting to me. It feels much more like a website, and there are just sort of hints and clues what to do next that I just don't think were there before. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
I have tried to resurrect this issue. If I did last night, if Robert and Joseph in particular, if you haven't seen this before, Jen and I were at a code sprint, a hackathon about a year and a half ago, and a first-time Backdrop user was trying to install and do something with Backdrop. She was trying to like reproduce an issue. And we used it a little bit like a usability study. Jen and I sat and watched her as she opened up the site and tried to find out how to do something. And I don't remember what the thing she was trying to do was, but what I remember was Jen and I were both like, if she just got to the dashboard, she would have had what she needed. And she went back and forth looking, and it never occurred to her to go to the dashboard. And Jen immediately opened up a ticket saying maybe we should redirect new users directly to the dashboard, which didn't go over really well. But there was a suggestion, which again, if you saw the issue, that maybe we just have a link for new sites, direct, letting them know about the dashboard. And to me, it's like the links to the documentation. On the one hand, they're kind of specific links, and like whether people are going to need those specific links immediately or not is questionable. But what's most important to me is that we're just introducing them to that documentation. We're sort of inviting them to say, hey, this documentation is out there, use it.
You mean from the installer or from the dashboard?
From the cards themselves. They have 3 links. So if you spin up a site, it has 3 cards. And each of the cards link to a different part of the documentation. I think one of them links to content types. So not within Drupal, they don't link, or within Backdrop. They don't. We at one point we had like links that like here's where you go edit your content types, but for a few reasons those ideas were rejected. And what we ended up with was links to the docs site.
Okay.
And like getting to the dashboard also invites you to the docs. Go ahead, Robert.
You just made me think of something. That home page also shows your first post, which says this is your first post, you may edit or delete it. So obviously that has to change. It seems like that first post would be a great place to put tips like administrators, check out the dashboard, and because users are going to change that anyhow. So it's okay to put stuff there that won't be on a real website.
I agree 1,000%, Robert. And earlier drafts of this PR had that, but
why was it shot down?
Well, I think that it wouldn't have been shot down if it was done consistently at the end. The problem was that idea came up too early in the process. And early in the process, it confused things. And so people didn't like it. I think if people looked at the website now, it would make sense to modify that text. And I don't know that there would be objections to it. So I actually think we could certainly, that wouldn't need a major release to change that content. And we could try to get something in before Sunday, but more likely maybe in the next bug fix release. Right, that could go into the first bug fix release of the next thing, which would be to update that content to make it sort of consistent and to maybe add one more link right into the. But there was resistance, prior to this PR. The idea was to keep the front page as simple and have as little content on it as possible, and like starting to add educational content, there was resistance to. But now we've done that already, right? That's no longer, we can't say that we don't want to do that because we've done it. And so I think adding a little bit, as long as it's not anything too crazy, right? If we keep it short and keep it kind of consistent in the same tone as the cards, it makes sense to me.
Do you have a record of what you had developed before to put on there, or maybe tried out before, and then you could retrieve that and maybe use it for this release?
Well, I could, but I frankly think that we would want to change it because we would want to make it more consistent with the current text. And that's not hard. Coming up with new text isn't the hard part, I think.
I did just realize one problem with that is that page is visible to non-logged in users. And if we say go to the dashboard and then it leads to you are not a that would be bad.
Well, the cards are also visible to non-logged in users. And that's why
Yeah, but I mean, if we added administrator specific stuff,
right. No,
that-
that's been overruled already.
yeah.
The some of the original text for the cards linked to administrative features, but right away there were objections to that said, no, we can't do that because. So that's why all of the links currently go to the documentation page, because that is something anybody has access to, right? So if we added any links, they would probably have to do that. Yeah, like the same. Go ahead, Joseph.
Is the problem that people don't want all this stuff cluttering up the standard profile, or that?
Well,
I don't know.
I mean, when you say is what the problem is, again, the problem has changed a bit because I think 9 months ago, people didn't want this clutter, but I think we've talked through that and now some clutter has been accepted, right?
So I have,
yeah, go ahead.
so this might be a crazy idea, but what if we had an install profile that was basically a complete website, like something you would deliver to a finished client that was a how to use Backdrop website?
I love it. That idea has come up before. I don't know. I mean, I think this is a good topic for outreach because this would be an outreach thing, really, wouldn't it? Yet I love the idea. I mean, the question would be, I think the biggest pushback to that is that a deliberate choice was made to not have multiple install profiles early on, right? So unlike with Drupal, where you had a choice between a minimal and a standard profile, Backdrop doesn't give you that choice. And now maybe this would be a reason to bring that choice back, which, as I just discovered last night, is trivial. We have 2 install profiles in Backdrop right now, right? But one of them is deliberately hidden. All you have to do is unhide it and it shows up. So if we created a learning profile, we could easily just have it show up. I don't know if people would object to that. Like, because there's been a lot of push over the years to keep the installation process as streamlined, as simple as possible, as few choices as possible. And I don't know what the attitude. I also don't know how people would feel about adding a lot of that content into core. So,
yeah,
go ahead.
I do think, especially for the minimal, like giving them the option to have all of your features broken is not really a good option. So hiding the minimal seems to that makes sense to me. But I think if we had actually fully featured working options, then I don't think that would be a problem.
Well, here's the way I think this happens, and this would be something I would get excited about, and I know Sarvashri would as well, is to just build out a distribution like that as a contrib project first, with the idea, but make it clear up front that it's a candidate for core, right? That we're building it out for inclusion in core possibly, but we'd have to show people how it works first before. So that way people would know what our intent is, but they wouldn't be able to say no until it actually got fleshed out enough that they could try it. And then once it's fleshed out and it actually works, then we could introduce the idea of bringing it into core, or not introduce, we could, but bring that back up and say, okay, now we think it's ready for core. What do people think? I would love that idea. I don't know if it would fly in the general community. I can name some people who I think would push back on this.
Would it stay in core, or is it something that could be quickly eliminated once you've used it?
Well, the code would sit there in your install basis. You'd only actually use it during, just like the standard install profile. We have a standard install profile right now, which runs the first time you spin up your Drupal site, and then it never runs again. And it's there, it's in your code. It doesn't hurt anything. It doesn't slow your site down. It's just a bunch of files. It's not even a bunch, it's a couple of files.
I think it's 3.
Well, it's a few more now because it now includes like
Oh, yeah, I guess.
the images. We've added a couple of images to the install profile.
Okay.
But no, it's not many files at all. It doesn't take up much space. And this new thing probably wouldn't either, depending on how elaborate we made it. But I think that would be a really good idea, and I would love to work on it. So,
Yeah. I think that would be cool, if, even as a proof of concept in Contrib.
yeah. Well, and the thing is, we don't have any Contrib distributions right now. And it would be nice to just have one as an example to prove that, I know that there are people in our community, including possibly you guys. Do you guys have a distribution that you use internally, Joseph?
Yeah.
Okay, I think
We-
Peter
We kind of
does.
have it.
Go ahead.
We kind of have it set up. So it doesn't, it's just an installation profile. And at the
Right.
moment, it doesn't really do much more than standard,
Okay.
but it's like,
Um,
we essentially keep everything in a multi-site and
Right.
just run this install profile that enables
Yeah.
a bunch of modules.
And I used to do that. I had my own install profile that I would use when spinning up new sites that just added and enabled modules that I always used. But then when I started working on Simplo, I went with a different approach, which was instead of using an install profile, I just import a database. So,
Right.
which is different, but also works for my use case. So, well, this meeting's almost over. This idea of like a beginner, I mean, this has come up at other outreach or dev meetings, and I think it's generally accepted that it would be helpful to have something like that. It's debated whether or not it should go into core. And it could be, well, the problem, well, this is where recipes come in, is that right now you can't install an install profile after the site is spun up. So we can't include an install profile in the in-app like browser, because it wouldn't make any sense to install it later. But an elaborate recipe could be, there could be then, because the problem right now with the Contrib install profile is that you'd have to download it manually, put it in your folder structure, which for a lot of users, no problem. But for some of the people that we'd like to use this, that might be too much for them. It would, whereas a recipe is something they could just install the website, use a one-click installer at GoDaddy. They could go to the project browser, they could find the module which says beginner starting kit, download that module, run it, and it would upload a bunch of features and have their site look like, so it, I don't know. Maybe we should start it out as a recipe and then make it into an install profile if
Could it also be, like you said, you're using a database now? Could it be just a
No.
database that's imported?
No, that doesn't work for other sites. It only works for me because it's my server.
Right. Yeah.
It's not,
He-
it's
he
not
has it.
practical.
Tim has his system set up to support that, and we
Right.
would have to have some method of distributing the databases.
Okay,
And that's hard. I don't think it's practical.
well, I'm always trying.
Yeah. I mean, it is, when you have the system set up, it's really nice and easy, but it's not good for distributed systems. It's good when you're using it. It works well internally. So,
So Joseph's idea is sort of best idea so far. Huh?
yeah.
Well, having it as a recipe or as a installation profile kind of doesn't make a difference. It's just how we package it.
Yeah. And it's just sort of how people access it. Right.
Is there
Go ahead.
is there an issue for allowing people to download install profiles? from
Yes.
the-
I'm pretty sure there is, because I know Greg brings this up frequently. I know Greg has brought it up a number of times. And I only sort of scoff at that a bit, very politely, because I have no idea how that would work, right? To me, an install profile is an install profile. So when you say like, okay, if you're saying you can add it later, well, then it's really just a module, right? So
Well, they effectively are modules. They just only run once.
right. Well, yes, and recipes in theory kind of only run once as well. So there's kind of space. Recipes are something in between an install, in theory, something in between an install profile and a module, but they look like modules.
I like the module idea because when you're done with that learning, then you could just delete that module, install other things.
That is true. And in a way, well, you could certainly uninstall it. The average user is probably just going to leave it on their server, which is, again, it doesn't really hurt anything. It doesn't take up much space, and the code would never be touched again if you uninstall it. So that's probably what most people would do, is you could tell them, install the module. The other thing that has been talked about is the ability to uninstall a distribution or a recipe, because one of the downsides of them is that you install them and then you're stuck with them. You can't, let's say we had a massage therapist recipe and a law office recipe. You can't install the law office recipe and then say, oops, I don't like this one, uninstall, and then try the other one, right? Once it's installed, everything's there.
I'm dropping the law firm and I'm going into massage therapy. Yeah, so module
Exactly.
approach sounds like the best of all worlds.
Yeah. But that problem of uninstalling, is that solvable, Joseph? I mean, in a way, I think it's solvable. It's just a little bit dangerous, right? Because there are too many there's opportunities for people to hurt themselves, right? If you uninstalled it and deleted all of your content types and fields.
Right, we would have to. How would you do that? You could have. Yes, you could have it be removable. What you would need to do is you would need a. Sorry, one moment. Okay. My dad's watching it on YouTube and talking to me about what we said a minute ago.
He's got his own ideas. Okay.
You could use an uninstall hook to remove all the stuff when you disable the recipe.
Right.
If you had a user interface for actually making the recipes, then we could automate all of that stuff.
Right.
So like you have a UI that lists out all your config files and you pick, I need this content type and all the fields related to it. And that would just create your recipe. And then it would make an uninstall hook that removed all those config files.
Okay. Yeah, well, this is all interesting, but kind of a big task.
What you could do if you don't want it, so that would be the destructive method. But what you could do if you wanted a non-destructive method is have you could either just leave everything there, which is kind of what they do now, or you could have a base that provides your fields and and then you could remove your content types without removing your fields and have your, or remove like views without removing your content types and just have everything essentially disappear from the user interface.
Well, if you had a learning backdrop module and it had everything that people would want to know about backdrop and learning to use it, that could just be put up as a website. And then they could go to that website and see it and use it to develop their own website.
That's a completely different idea, which is one that I've also played with. So, but we're out of time. This discussion wandered a bit. It's an interesting topic, though.
Well, it's expected if we don't have an agenda, so we're all just free floating.
I can anticipate answers already, but any final thoughts on promoting 1.22? I think this meeting has been a little bit helpful to me in terms of like, I'll probably write the blog post about this release and like what to emphasize. I'm hopefully going to do a video, but I keep promising to do those every release and don't get around to it. So we'll see. But if anybody wanted to do a release video, that would be helpful.
Is there somewhere,
Go ahead.
is there somewhere to see which issues went in? I haven't really been paying attention much the last few
Yeah,
weeks.
well, you can just go to the milestone and click if you go to the issue queue and you go to the milestone and you look at the 1.22 milestone, you'll see all of the closed issues. And those are all the ones that got in.
Okay.
I think that's the easiest way. Does that sound right, Robert? To get a list. I mean, there will be, well, actually, we might have, I think we have release notes for the preview release. And those release notes now would also be a good source. That wasn't available until the preview release. The other thing to look at, well, of course, is we can't forget to look at the bug fixes because there are some bug fixes that are significant, I think. You know, stuff like Robert's, the rewording of the layouts, the stuff you added to the layout page that makes that easier to use. To me, that's like a new feature, but it's not technically in the 1.22 release because it was a bug fix release.
Allowing blocks to be disabled, that's actually a big deal.
Yeah, we haven't talked about that, but I think that might be the second most marketable. Although to it, like different audience, right? There's like a first-time Backdrop user might not care so much about that feature, but for Drupal 7 users or existing users, that's like a big one that people have been asking for. And I think they're going to be really happy. And it's also backward. Unlike the cards content type, that one will affect existing sites. So that's
Right.
exciting.
I think a lot of the other, I'm just scanning through here. I think a lot of it's like that and the cards, and then a lot of the other things are really just administrative things. Or like
Right.
the upgrading, the fixing the problem with Entity Plus during upgrades is like a big thing, but it's not really an easy thing to market.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, that's a good one to talk about right now quickly, Robert, because you were involved in it. And you obviously felt strongly about it. But how do I mean, is it something that we can promote? Will, like, it's primarily going to affect people who are upgrading Drupal 7 sites. But is it a problem? Is it something we can tell people about and they're going to appreciate, or will nobody appreciate it unless they've actually had the problem already?
Yeah, I don't know. It'd be kind of like drawing attention to a problem. It's like this thing that bit you in the butt isn't going to bite you anymore, and that's not a strong selling point. You know, buy this car because it no longer crashes.
Right. If we had a mailing list for people who'd crashed before and we could just send it to them, then it would be really helpful, right? It's like, but I get your point about, do we want to tell everybody that, okay, we had this big problem?
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, it's not like we're going to hide the fact that we've done it, but it might not be something we can really promote very well because I just don't know that people will. I mean, we could say something like some significant improvements have been made to the upgrade process or something.
Mhm.
Or
Yeah,
Go ahead.
You could just say,
Smoother up.
Sorry, what were you gonna say?
You know, I'm just gonna say, I mean, it's smoother upgrades for people who use certain modules. That's really what it boils down to. You're not going to get bad surprises if you upgrade those modules.
You know, the other one, although it's just such a narrow market, is that there are some good UI improvement. I think the book module works a lot better now with this thing we inserted, but I don't know that anybody cares because so few people use the book module. And also, unless you sort of used it before, it's a little bit like Robert's point. It's like promoting it would be to say using the book module will be less frustrating than it was before. It's not like it adds new features. It just makes it it makes it a less frustrating process. And it's hard to promote that. Oh, the date format, I think that's actually a promotable
Yeah.
feature, the additional date feature, the fact that it sort of automatically configures for a European format.
Multiple improvements to the user interface. Catch all.
Yeah. So, Sarvashri, for your information, if you haven't picked up on this, the date format one is the Europeans and everywhere in the world except the US puts the day before the month in their dates. And Backdrop has always used a US format. It's month, day, year. And starting with this 1.22, any new site will automatically, if you're outside the US, it will give you day, month, year.
It's
Now-
automatic. You don't have to try to.
You don't even have to make a choice. It just does it. And you can change it if you don't like it, which is what Europeans would probably have to do anyways. On the other hand, it's not as significant of a change as it sounds, because everybody in the world uses it different than the US. They all have their own little takes on it anyways. So most people are probably going to end up having to edit their time zone anyways, or maybe not. I don't know. We'll see. But I think that's a significant, nice improvement. Let's wrap up this meeting. The dev meeting is supposed to start. Given that neither Nate or Jen are coming, I don't know what we're going to do for this meeting. If anybody, I'd love for someone else to facilitate it if anybody wants to. Otherwise, I'm willing to facilitate it. Let's end the YouTube. We've still got the YouTube running. Bye, Jason. And anybody else who's watching. Where's the button?